In your roadmap of things that have to be done before we can engineer negligible senescence, which of them is the most challenging scientifically, the one you're least sure that we can do?
Definitely the combating of mutations in our nuclear genes, in other words, in our chromosomes in the nucleus. That doesn't have to be done thoroughly, but it has to be done in a way that stops us from dying of cancer, which is the hardest part of aging to fix. The reason it's the hardest is because, unlike everything else that goes wrong with us as we get older, cancer has natural selection on its side, so to speak. And the cleverer we get at throwing new treatments at it, or indeed the cleverer the body gets at doing so, the cleverer the cancer gets. It's very, very hard. The approach that I've outlined for doing this is extremely ambitious. It's still something that we ought to be able to demonstrate within the next 10 years or so in mice, but it'll last in maybe another 15 or 20 years in humans, but it's the hardest.
Right. And now suppose that that works, and suppose that the other elements of your, I don't know what you call it, a roadmap or something, suppose they all work out. How confident are you that the net result of that will indeed be negligible senescence? That, in other words, how confident are you that after that there will be another series of things which are killing us and which we'll have to start again from scratch and solve?
I'm not at all confident of that. In fact, I'm confident of the opposite. I'm confident there will be other things. But I'm pretty confident that they won't kill us for at least another 30 or 40 years. The reason for that confidence is that there's already about that much variation in the rates at which these things accumulate, the things we know about accumulate in different people. And also in different people, some things accumulate faster and some slower in the same person. So that inherent variation that we see in the population tells us that things that we haven't yet spotted, even though we've been looking quite hard, are unlikely to become prevalent until we've reached maybe 30 or 40 years older than we currently are. Now, of course, we've still got to fix them by then, but that's quite a long time in technology, so I'm hopeful that we'll be able to do so. And furthermore, I'm fairly sure that if these things that are coming up behind are so elusive and so hard to find, then probably the best way to find them is to eliminate the things we do know about and thereby unmask these other things, even if it turns out that those other things are much harder to fix and we don't fix them in time for the best bet.
Right, so, but in any case, it's not a matter of one more heave, it's a matter of crossing the barriers that we know about and then turning around and doing it again, except we'll be living on it.
That's right.
Right, yes. Now, you said, like, the most challenging thing you said is basically curing cancer, or curing this particular cause of cancer.
Yes.
So it seems to me then that curing diseases, that is the conventional aim of medical science, is going to be needed. And also, every bit of progress in conventional science is going to contribute, is going to increase lifespan and therefore contribute towards your project. And therefore, I can't quite see what is the tension, what is the conflict between your project and just the general project of medical science?
Yeah, very good question. The tension is there on many levels, actually. First of all, of course, there on the psychological level. We have this very deep-seated, long-standing belief that aging is inevitable and anything that tries to challenge that is inherently suspicious. But also, there's a problem at the technical level as well. In general, when you want to cure a disease, eventually you may be able to come up with something that's a real cure, like a vaccine for, I don't know, tuberculosis or whatever. But in the case of these age-related problems, the conventional approaches to them have really been ways to postpone them. Generally, to postpone them not very much at all, because even if you can only postpone something by maybe 10 or 20 years, that's pretty good. That's pretty much equivalent
to something else will kill you first.
And that's how all these calculations are done when you ask people, what they expect the effects of their up-and-coming therapies are. But of course, it never happens that way because progress does happen on all the others as well. So life gets longer, and we carry on dying of the same thing in roughly the same proportion as we used to. So the tension there is really that if you want something that gives you, let's say, 50 years postponement of a particular problem, then it's probably going to be harder to develop and more expensive to develop and so on. than something that only gives you 10 years. So while you're still looking at the 10-year thing as being quite attractive, it begins to be difficult to make an argument for the more ambitious approach.
And are you saying that the 10-year thing isn't particularly the best way to approach the 50-year thing?
Precisely, that's absolutely right. Most medical technologies, especially these ones that are more or less explicitly admitting that they're only postponements by a modest period, are not inherently extensible by an iteration of minor refinements. You have to really start with that.
Very interesting. You mentioned philosophical issues. I've heard of the fact that in our culture, death is supposed to be a great taboo. I haven't actually heard of life being a great taboo, and yet it seems that the idea of science providing human beings with more life is somehow causes the same kind of hostility as a taboo. Somehow it is a taboo.
Yeah.
So what is so scary about life?
It is completely irrational, there's no question about that, except insofar as it can be regarded as rational from a psychological point of view. So if we accept for the moment, which of course we don't, that aging really is inevitable and nothing can ever be done about it, and if we also accept that aging is ghastly, then really, we have to find some way of putting it out of our minds so that we can get on with our lives and not be miserable all the time about it. And one way to do that is to come up with reasons to think that curing aging would be bad, or that aging is good, or at least that it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. And it doesn't really matter how irrational the reasoning is that leads us to that conclusion. It's actually sort of worse than that. It's sort of there's an inversion of the psychological problems, because as with anything, the more irrational your argument for something actually is, for believing something, the more you sort of half know it's irrational, and the more defensive, or perhaps even aggressive, you have to be in maintaining your feeling against yourself and against others.
You have to sort of hold it in place. You need more emotion to hold it in place.
Precisely.
The worse it is as an argument.
Precisely.
But this, what you call irrationality, this isn't just a matter of religious people thinking that we owe our death to God or something. This is a general feature in our culture, religious, non-religious.
Absolutely. I think the major religions could be regarded as major examples of this, but they're certainly not the only examples. My conclusions, if they're correct, are extremely unpredictable for society and so on, and so that's something that politicians don't tend to like, and therefore it's not something that would endear gerontologists to politicians, and so people worry about whether I may be hurting gerontology by scaring people and perhaps inviting a diminution of future funding. There is, however, also the scientific point that most of my colleagues genuinely disagree with me. However, it's not really scientific, because the reason they disagree with me is largely because they don't know what I'm saying. I'm sure as a working scientist yourself, you appreciate that nobody has enough time to read as much as they'd like, and that's certainly true for experimental biologists. And so, of course, it's a bit of a catch-22. You have to be persuaded that something is worth studying in detail before you study it in detail, and if you have to study it in detail in order to establish that it was worth studying, then it never happens.
But you did say that your gerontology colleagues are... Okay, well, let's suppose that you're right. This is science. We can't guarantee anything.
No.
So we don't know that these problems will be solved in time to save me or you. Or we don't know for sure that anyone alive today can be saved by this proposed technology. Even though I'm actually quite sure, for quite fundamental reasons, that in principle it must be possible. That being so, though, isn't there a danger when you're promoting and arguing for this research philosophy? Isn't there a danger of raising false hopes in people?
There certainly is. And this is a very important question. The only reason I think that it's legitimate to talk about timeframes, and of course put probability on those timeframes, as I always do, is because the opposite is also true. If one stays silent on something where the public have a predisposition, a very deep-seated predisposition, in fact, to be fatalist and to think that nothing's ever going to happen, if one stays silent, then one is engendering unwarranted pessimism. And of course, the more pessimism exists in society, the more fatalism, the less people will agitate to get the work done and to have money spent, public money and so on, to get the work done, and that will delay the eventual development of these therapies, which will of course mean that lives are lost. So I feel that we have to press as hard as we can for this work to be done, and that entails getting people's imagination up and getting people's motivation up, and that entails talking about timescales.
Very good point. Well, perhaps we can be doing this right now. Yes. There's a whole other approach that I've heard of to what you might call the problem of immortality, namely what's so-called cryonics, that is to freeze people just after they've died or notionally died, and in the hope that future technology will be able to both cure whatever they died of and also undo the damage done by the freezing. Now, that's a completely different approach to yours. What do you think of it?
Well, actually, I think it's quite realistic. And the reason I think it's realistic is because you're wrong. It's not a completely different approach at all. It's merely a sort of add-on to my approach. My approach is to take people who have not yet died and repair the damage that has accumulated in them as intrinsic side effects of metabolism throughout their lives, and thereby maintain them in a useful condition, both physically and mentally. Now, when you die officially, in other words, when you become legally dead, not much has happened. Basically, the difference between being legally alive and legally dead, or clinically alive and clinically dead, is not in the state you're in, but in the rate at which that state is changing. So you're gradually going downhill, then your heart stops, and you start going downhill a lot faster. But it's still a finite slope. And that's why cryonics is reasonable. It means that if one can be cryopreserved, taken down to liquid nitrogen temperatures, or thereabouts, within a small amount of time, a matter of hours, ideally, from the point at which one's heart stops, then the amount of damage that has occurred in the process of post-death decay is relatively minor. So that means that you preserve the person in more or less the same state that they were in just before their heart stopped. Now, as you say, damage may be done during the cryopreservation process, though in fact that problem is more or less history. There are now cryoprotectants that are so good that no crystallization at all occurs in the process of taking someone down to liquid nitrogen temperatures, though there are still problems with crystallization during the warm-up process, it turns out. And there are one or two other problems with fracturing and so on. But anyway, so the problems, progress is being made very rapidly. There is a toxicity problem, a straightforward chemical toxicity problem with these cryoprotectants, but again, progress is being made there. So really, as far as I'm concerned, the main challenge to resuscitating someone who has been cryopreserved in the best possible state that we today can manage is actually to solve the repair of the things that accumulated before they died, which is exactly what I'm already working on. That's why I say that the cryonics thing is just sort of add-on to what I'm doing already. You see, because the first generation of these technologies, when we develop them, probably if you're at death's door, we won't be able to help you very much, because these will be very elaborate and exploratory technologies that will be quite strenuous, and you probably won't be vigorous enough to withstand them. But as time goes on, rather rapidly I suspect, these technologies will be improved in not only their convenience and cost and comprehensiveness, but also in terms of those characteristics that make them inapplicable to people who are nearly dead. And therefore we'll be able to pull you back from progressively closer and closer to the brink. And of course, as I say, there's not really a brink at the point your heart stops. So in other words, it's perfectly reasonable to suppose that incremental improvements on those same technologies will be able to bring you back from a little way beyond the legal brink.
That's all very optimistic and good. Now, again, supposing that you're right, if somebody were to walk in here now with a gun and say, I'll kill you in 5 minutes, or I'll kill you in a year, or whatever, unless you do so, unless you hand over this priceless dinosaur, or unless you give me all your money, I think most people would be inclined to say, well, life is more important than just property, so, they'd be inclined to give at gunpoint whatever is asked, more or less. They'd be willing to give quite a lot before they begin to think that it's not worth the candle.
Right.
As we've discussed, though, somehow in regard to natural aging, people take the opposite view. They would rather die than hand over material goods in the form of research funds for you. But nevertheless, they do have a germ of a point there, which it seems to me is this. What proportion of our national wealth or the wealth of the world should, and also intellectual effort and also dislocation from social change and so on, what total effort, what total proportion of our effort do you think it is rational for the world to give your project?
I really don't know, and the only reason I'm content not to know is that I see the process evolving through a first period in which there is only a very small amount of money being spent by gross national product standards. And at the end of that period, there will be interim results in the laboratory in mice that will convince, first of all, gerontologists as a whole, and thereby society as a whole, that this is possible. At the moment, there is, as we've discussed, a general feeling that this whole thing just can't be done, that aging is inevitable. And that will be overthrown by results in the laboratory, which are relatively cheap. Now that means that once those results have occurred, there will be a great debate in society with regard to exactly the question you've asked, among others, about how much we ought to throw at this, how much we ought to throw, in fact, at other things that we throw a little at the moment, like, for example, the development of vaccines or giving people in Africa mosquito nets and whatever. I think all of these...
Yes, this is worth doing, and a whole load of other things are also worth doing.
That's right.
Yes.
Our whole system of priorities in terms of spending will have to be completely rethought, and I suspect that rethinking will be energetically pursued as soon as the progress in the laboratory is sufficient to persuade gerontologists as a whole, rather than just me, that this is really foreseeable.
It's very nice to see that you're optimistic not only about your scientific research, but also about the prospect of persuading the world at large that it is worth it.
I'm optimistic, but I think we ought to be careful about how we use the word optimistic, because, as you were saying earlier in your upcoming book, you've discussed this a bit, that in a sense there's a certain suspicion about optimism in modern society, and the word optimism has this sort of double-edged ring to it, as if it's optimistic is almost synonymous with over-optimistic.
Yes.
So I think I want to make the point that I've thought about these things pretty hard, and I reckon that my conclusions are accurate as they can be, neither optimistic nor pessimistic. I think that the reason why society will follow the opinions of the gerontology consensus is borne out by the fact that general belief of society in scientific matters follows the consensus of the relevant scientific community in pretty much everything else. So we have a great deal of precedent from which to stand, from which to make that conclusion. Similarly, I think that based on my knowledge of the field in gerontology, I know what it's going to take to persuade my colleagues not just to believe that we are within striking distance of seriously postponing human aging, but actually to say so on the television. And so I think both of those things are going to happen when we get a particular milestone that I've always talked about with mine.
Well, that's wonderful. Yes.
The hardest one, as I mentioned, is cancer, and that's going to involve quite sophisticated stem cell therapy, but it's also going to involve quite sophisticated gene therapy. And gene therapy, of course, is important in a bunch of these things. It's important for getting the bacterial genes into our cells once we've found the gene, and also modified them. It's important for putting the mitochondrial genes into the nucleus, because we have to do modifications in the laboratory and the test tube before we can do that. Gene therapy is an area which, again, people are being very illogical about it. In terms of proof of concept, people are very aware, and it's not really all I'm interested in right now. Gene therapy is really going quite well.
If in all these cases, in all 7 of these lines of research, can we think about translating from the scientific breakthrough to the therapy, to what it will look like from the punter's point of view? How can I envisage this? If this worked, would I be, let's say, visiting the doctors at the end of every Christmas and getting an injection of something which will rejuvenate me? Or will it be really serious, aggressive intervention that will take up 90% of my time, and I'll spend the rest of the time enjoying it? Or what?
I think that at first, when the first therapies arrive, they're bound to be quite strenuous, quite experimental, quite elaborate. I wouldn't be at all surprised if it entails going into hospital for a month and having all manner of different stem cell therapies, for example, some stem cells injected into the bloodstream, others injected into the brain, maybe directly, or into other tissues. Gene therapy, again, by injections, probably using viruses, which are the main ways in which we do gene therapy at the moment. It'll also involve vaccines, it'll involve standard drugs as well.
So it won't be very nice to have this done to you.
At first, it'll be elaborate, but it will be a month in hospital, and then you've got 10 years before you have to come back, maybe.
Okay.
And the point is that in those 10 years, of course, there will have been a lot of pressure, a lot of market pressure to improve these therapies,
right.
so that it's quicker. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if 10 years later I take a day in hospital, and it wouldn't surprise me if 10 years after that one doesn't need to go to hospital at all. One just goes to one's GP and has a bunch of injections. Put probabilities on this, not just to say this will happen in this particular period of time, but to say I think that we have this amount of chance of this happening in this period of time. However, I do like to stick my neck out and give such timescales. Most of my colleagues refuse to do so. They say it's engendering unwarranted optimism in society to put timescales on things that we don't know. I say that's nonsense. I say we're engendering unwarranted pessimism if we stay silent. Mm-hmm. So my time frames are, I think that with sufficient funding, we should be able to reach the first milestone that I like to talk about, which is real serious life extension in mice within 10 years. Now, when I say serious funding, I mean something in the region of $100 million a year for 10 years.
And that's serious by scientific research standards.
Not even by scientific research standards, certainly not by war in Iraq standards. Right. What I mean by serious life extension is two things. First of all, I mean that the actual length of life has to be improved, and in particular it has to be healthy life that's improved. So we're absolutely not talking here about extending people or mice's frail life. Mm-hmm. But secondly, and very importantly, the therapies have to begin when the mice are already in middle age. And also the mice have to be pretty healthy, robust, long-lived mice naturally. So what that means in round numbers is that we take a strain of mice that would normally live about 3 years, that's on the high side for mice, and we do nothing at all to them until they're already 2, so they've got a year left, and we treble that, we get them out to their 5th birthday on average. If we can do that, we've trebled the remaining lifespan of healthy mice, starting from the point where we start the therapy, then I think that will convince all my colleagues that we're on the right track into humans as well, and that will convince us that.
So that you estimate, like one of my earlier questions, where the existing medical research fits into this scheme. For instance, one of the things that has to be done is basically curing cancer. Mm-hmm. Curing cancer is already something that there's a lot of money going into and so on. And so, are you saying that you're going to ride the wave of the cancer cure that is coming anyway? Or is this project going to somehow accelerate even cancer cures? If so, why is it not already mainstream?
Right. The reason is, essentially, it's a fine example of what I was saying earlier about modestly effective therapies that seem to be relatively easy to develop being preferred over extremely ambitious therapies that might be much more effective. So I'm looking at developing therapies that could give us a postponement of death from cancer by maybe 50 years at least. And nobody else is looking at therapies that would be able to do that much. Basically, the power of natural selection in a cancer is sufficient that any therapy which can in principle be escaped by the cancer, if the cancer can just turn on or off the right, some appropriate constellation of genes, will be escaped. Actually, I think that the milestone that I'm interested in for humans is a little bit less extreme in numerical terms than the milestone for mice. For mice, I said, take a mouse that's 2/3 of the way through its lifespan and treble its remaining lifespan. For humans, I think it would be good enough to double the remaining lifespan. So in other words, take someone who's maybe 55, got 30 years left on average, give them an extra 30 years, and 30 healthy years, of course. Now, the reason that I'm aiming for this rather less ambitious goal.
It's, what, 115?
115, that's right. On average. Now, the reason I'm aiming for this rather less ambitious goal in proportionate terms is because 30 years is such a long time in science. In 30 years, as we've seen in all these other technologies, if one has the public motivation and also if the advances that need to be made can be made incrementally in relatively small steps, in 30 years one can basically completely transform a technology just by progressive refinement to something that's much more effective than it was originally. So I'm very confident that if we can develop therapies which can give 55-year-olds an extra 30 years of life, then by the time they get to be biologically 55 again, when they're, let's say, 85 or 90, the therapies that have been developed in the meantime will be so much better than the ones they got when they were 55, that they won't just have another 30 years left. They will get these new therapies and have another maybe 50 more years left, or 100 years. So basically this means that it's a bit like keeping a vintage car going. Vintage cars just don't have a mortality rate. They only die when their owners die, well enough to keep it going pretty much indefinitely. We just have to develop the same degree of technology for humans and we'll be done. And I've been calling this concept life extension escape velocity because what it means effectively is that technology is improving faster than the remaining imperfections in the technology are catching up with us. And therefore the amount of microscopic damage, molecular and cellular damage, which is in the body at any one time, is not ever able to rise to a level of abundance that's actually causing loss of function and age-related disease. Of course, what that means for lifespan is rather man-made. People have done this calculation a few times over the years, and people get slightly different answers, but to within a factor of 2, people reckon that we would live to about 1,000 if we didn't have any aging at all. And that's based on how often we die of people in the West, these people in wealthy societies in the West, die of causes that have nothing to do with aging, whether it be crossing the road carelessly or homicide or infectious diseases or whatever. Now, interestingly, of course, that calculation is a bit naive because
we can affect risks.
Well, realistically, we are likely to affect risks. I think we're likely to become considerably more risk-averse in consequence of knowing that we have so much more at stake. When I was writing a book about 5 years ago on the science of some of aging, I had a few pages at the end about the social context, and one thing I predicted then was that driving would be outlawed. I now think that may be an overstatement. I think that simply what may happen is we'll throw a lot of money at the problem and we'll all drive incredibly safe cars with very sophisticated sensors that can avoid serious injury even in the context of really massive human error, whether it be by the driver or by a pedestrian.
Our risk aversion seems to be increasing anyway, even without life extension.
I think that's absolutely right. I think it's not just our risk aversion either, it's our impression of the value of life. It's our impression of the value of life, that's right. Yes. I mean, I think the fact that we've all abolished the death penalty across the whole of Europe since the war, it's a measure of the thing to do any veterans society. So I think this bodes well. And of course the same can be said of other aspects of society. The fact that, for example, in the West, the birth rate is declining so rapidly, this means that we may have longer than we might otherwise think to be able to cope with any overpopulation problems that might arise from essentially eliminating death from aging. So yeah, these are reasons for optimism being realistic.